I want to invite the panelists for the Regulation and Revolutions panel. Jacob Faber, I saw him earlier. Chris, you can check where Jacob is. Jacob Faber. He should be outside. Deidre, could Deidre come up, please? Mr. Donald Temple, are you in the room? Welcome, sir. Yeah, so as they're coming up, my name is John Karanja. I'm the founder of BeatUp Africa, and we are based in Nairobi, Kenya, working on blockchain development with young entrepreneurs, young students in universities. And this particular baraza, titled Regulations and Revolutions, is one of the key issues that we are facing as black people around the world. And I'm very happy to have the ambassador here. One of the challenges we do have is we have a lot of laws that are old for example, in Kenya, they're from the British colonial system. And those laws actually, for all intents and purposes, inhibit innovation because they're quite rigid. So my first question to you, Ambassador, sort of to kick off the panel, is how does the ACFA, is that how you say it? African
Continental Free
Trade Area. How does that sort of solve that challenge of regulations? And you can kick off there.
Well, actually, that's precisely the point. When you look at, it's not only the regulations from Kenya, we are looking at even the CEFA. Some situations are going to implode because where we are coming in, we're coming at the continental level. Like I said, we have the continental implementation teams. We have rules and regulations that have been implemented for the purposes of melting those boundaries. So whatever was applicable to the country is no longer applicable because we are looking at the Continental Development Agenda. So the Continental Development Agenda neutralizes a lot of what is going on the ground as individual African countries, because those laws only apply to a country. The Continental Agenda applies to the continent.
All right, so we now have Jacob Faber. He'll give us sort of a breakdown, a short brief breakdown on how regulations are structured in the United States and a framework on blockchain. So you can go ahead, Jacob.
Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I joined the panel late. I was told that we were running late and we'd be on after lunch. Apparently not. So thank you for letting me speak to you guys. And I've been doing blockchain and cryptocurrency-related legal and regulatory work since 2012, starting with representing the Bitcoin Foundation way back when, the whole first wave of Bitcoin companies. So I've been in the space a long time, and long enough to see that one of the, if not the most significant driver of success for startups and companies in this space is the regulatory framework. I guess that after having a good business plan, which there's still way too few of in the space. But once you have a good business plan, the legal and regulatory framework can be an enabler, but it can also be a huge barrier. In the period from like 2012 to 2014, no Bitcoin companies could really get off the ground in the US because, for example, the state departments of banking that regulate money transmission were all trying to figure out if businesses that moved cryptocurrencies around should be regulated as money transmitters. And literally, for the companies that even filed money transmission applications out of an abundance of caution, the states were just sitting on the applications because they couldn't get their heads around whether to regulate this as something new, try and cram it in under their old laws. So the point is being aware of the legal and regulatory framework can have a huge impact on just about every business model in the space. That's point one. And then I'm going to give you a few quick points that in literally 3 or 4 minutes, try and summarize at a very high level the main legal and regulatory concerns. And I'm happy to talk to anybody in more detail, because this is obviously going to be very cursory. And I'm going to talk about it primarily from the US perspective, because I'm a US trained lawyer. But at a high level, the same legal and regulatory regimes that are applied in the US are applied everywhere else. and largely, at least at a gross level, in the same ways, although I think the U.S. is considered the high watermark of legal and regulatory compliance hurdles in the space. So very quickly, there are two major legal regimes you have to be aware of if you're starting a Bitcoin or a cryptocurrency or a blockchain-related business. And it's true in the U.S., it's true outside the U.S. The first, and this is the one that's been around since the beginning of time, is money transmission. Western Union is a money transmitter. Historically, every state has a statute regulating money transmitters, and those statutes were aimed at brick and mortar money transmitters. You go into a retail location, you give them money, and somebody else across the country picks up money from another retail location. And since literally 2011, 2012, the states have been trying to figure out how to apply their money transmission regimes to cryptocurrency and blockchain. And there's an equivalent U.S. federal regulatory scheme under the Bank Secrecy Act, which regulates anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing. And they call money transmission a money service business, and if you meet the definition of money transmission at the federal level, you've got to register as an MSB. In the states, it's not just a registration, you actually have to apply for a money transmission license if you're falling within the definition of money transmission. The reason why this matters is there is a federal statute, 5 U.S.C. 1960, which makes it a federal felony with a 5-year prison sentence to not only fail to register at the federal level if you're a money transmitter, and we'll talk about what money transmission is in just a second, but you're also subject to criminal prosecution by the feds if you've done business in a state where you needed a state money transmission license and don't have one. So the federal law criminalizes the failure to follow state law. And I can't convey enough how much of a real concern this is for companies and how much it's shaped the whole ecosystem. And at a really gross level, if your business model is taking funds, whether real money or cryptocurrency, from person A and moving that to person B, you're probably a money transmitter, or you at least have to look at it. And it's more nuanced than that, and there are exceptions, and it doesn't mean that everybody who has got a cryptocurrency business is a money transmitter, but it means you got to be aware of it and look at it and make sure you're getting good counsel to make sure that you're not falling into a box you don't want to fall into. And if you do fall in the box, you have to comply because the penalties for noncompliance are just too high. That's regime 1 of 2. The second big regime that's become a bigger issue over the past 2 or 3 years is securities law. And that happened because in really 2017, we saw this boom of so-called initial coin offerings or ICOs or token sales where people were building blockchain protocols, and to fund development were pre-selling the token or the cryptocurrency that they were going to use on their platform. And it created this huge hype cycle. There were token sales that raised well in excess of hundreds of millions of dollars. There was resulting fraud because it became in a way to mint money. And in the US, the SEC stepped in, and I won't bore you with the details of the legal test, but there's something called the Howey test, which basically asks the question, is this a security? And if it's a security, you can't sell it without registering it. Just like you can't have an IPO without registering it with the SEC, any security offering that's public has to fall within has to be either registered, which is expensive and time consuming, or has to fall within one of several exceptions to the registration requirement. And it's been pretty well decided that an awful lot of token sales, at least if they're made available to US buyers, can fall into the label of being a security under the so-called Howey test. And again, there's no time here because I don't want to take away from other people in the panel to tell you what that test is. But what you need to know is if you're selling a token in any sort of sale or an initial offering, you have to check off whether you've slipped into selling a security. And if so, you can't do it without complying because the penalties include rescission, which means you have to give back every dollar that you took in. And usually those dollars have been spent. So you end up with personal liability and a really irritated SEC, which can, by the way, reach through any company to get at the principals, get at the founders. So you end up with personal liability, and it's a real mess. So anyway, those are the two major legal areas you have to be aware of. There's lots of others. It's like the internet, right? There's really no law of blockchain. There's no law of the internet, but there's lots of specific ways that other areas of the law get applied. I've mentioned two big ones. Depending on what your business model is, several others could come into relevancy for your model. Commodities law, is what you're selling a commodity? Is it regulated by the commodity regulators? So just, if you're doing a business that involves moving money or selling tokens or really anything else, make sure you're checking off with counsel, because it's a constantly evolving and kind of dangerous framework. So again, I'll be glad to chat more about any particular thing later, but I want to stop talking now and let everybody else in the panel have airtime.
All right, thank you, Jacob. So, Mr. Donald Temple, from your experience, you've worked on a lot of sort of big cases. What are your thoughts on regulations in the context of the black community, and how can we ensure that these regulations or policymakers end up with the right regulation?
If I may, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm Donald Temple. I'm a lawyer of 41 years here in the District of Columbia, and I do primarily civil rights law and litigation, and I teach. One of my cases involves a African shipper out of Guinea, and a landmark case where we're suing the mining company here in the United States District Court, Nanko Shipping, and where we've been able to keep a case in a federal court involving shipping discrimination against the mining company for depriving the licensed Guinean shipping company of the rights to ship. I've had the pleasure, I'm also a strong Pan-Africanist influence, and so I appreciate your remarks, and I've had the opportunity to visit 12 African countries with a varying experience. This gentleman is more experienced in what I wanted to talk about and what I think I need to talk about. I'm actually intellectually curious about the cryptogram for the reasons that the ambassador had spoken about. But I wanted to point out a backdrop for that. One of the fundamental human rights under the United Nations Charter is the right to self-determination. And we have struggled historically with determining our destiny. But as we speak, whether it's the panelists here or the people in the audience, I don't want to speak about crypto technology for the point of us making money individually. I'm not interested in making money through crypto coins individually. But I am interested in what it means in the context of our collective self-determination. In my law school class, Ambassador, I teach my students to not look at the rock, but to look at the rock that's under the rock. And in this particular context, I submit to you today, and I've listened to the speakers attentively, that the type of currency dynamics that we're interested in bringing into play for our collective, and I mean in the African diaspora development, has not been created. In our best minds, and I've heard brilliant minds here today, but I guarantee you that there are people a lot younger than me and people a lot younger than people on this panel who don't think with the stale minds that I, as a 66-year-old person, would think. And that the technology opportunity to marry what's in play on the African continent is significant. But I want to share a caveat with you. People speak as if we have time eternal. We're in an information age right now where technology and the speed of which knowledge is growing is exponential to our significant disadvantage. In just 30 years from 2020, the autonomous driving car industry will be $9 trillion in the United States. By 2040, we're going to lose about 27 million jobs as we know them by way of automation, i.e. robotics and artificial intelligence. Time is changing. That digital divide, exacerbated by global warming, has implications for our community. And we have to begin to change the way that we're thinking about this. it is significant, I think, from our point of view, that this notion of blockchain, Bitcoin, is receiving so much attention. But I was studying this thing, and I was curious about it, not only as a lawyer, but as an anthropologist. Who created the Bitcoin? You don't know. You know a name. It's not regulated, but it is still, nevertheless, receiving the confidence of an incredible constituency. There are, I read, 40 million Bitcoin wallet users, and the market is at about 5.6 Bitcoin. It's at 40 billion wallet users. That's a lot of people not to know what this thing is. Is the Bitcoin Jesus? Huh? What's going on? Well, there's an issue here, and it goes back to the way we think as people of African descent, people. And we need to think about this, because it is a trust foundation factor. And as we begin to look at our own social empowerment within a framework of a limited period of time, and I say a limited period of time, because with technology comes disruption. And with disruption comes adjustments, domestically and internationally. So the challenge for us is not just merely to look, and we're captivated by it and even intoxicated by it, and people talk about making money individually. Maybe, maybe not. But if anything, what I would challenge us to do is to begin to think about the marriage when we talk about the capitalistic needs or capital needs in terms of the continent and the relationship between what happens on the continent and the diaspora. Why can't we think about the ownership and creation of our own Bitcoins or our own technology, alternative coins? There are, as many smart people are in this room, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of African students, engineers, scientists, young people, families that are waiting with eager interest to change the worlds in which they live. The notion under the rock, that's under the rock, that with all of this knowledge, the mistake we make is that we buy into traditional thinking because we want to emulate the dominant culture.
Yep.
For the 21st century, people, the most important thing that I think we can do, not for ourselves, but for future generations, is that we look at this technology. The brother here wrote a book. I was glad to see his life is committed to it, and the fact that this conference is going on.
Yeah.
But what does it really mean if we do not use this technology to alter our condition? From the point of view of self-determination, from the struggle of the Lumumbas and the Cabrals and the Nkrumahs, who didn't have the lawyers and the copyright people and the MBAs in that period, but today who have that. There's no excuse for us not to change the way we think and to buy into traditional paradigms, but to think about different paradigms that will bring us without hesitation. The passion that you display is not a passion of your own. It's a passion rooted in our victimization for centuries, there and here. But we have the capacity not to struggle to raise $10 billion. That's obscene. When our economy here in the United States alone, and what we spend is at the $1 trillion level. So if there's a creative way to use the enterprise, I think we need to move in that direction.
All right. Thank you very much. I think we've gotten great counsel from both of you. And unfortunately, the ambassador has to leave. So we want to just pick up on your last point and have Isaiah Jackson present a gift to the ambassador together with Mr. Mapondera. So please come up and say something about it.
How you doing, beautiful people? Glad to be here with the ambassador again, and I would like to present you with the gift of the book Bitcoin in Black America for you to read and also share with others. And I hope you love it and enjoy it. Definitely put a lot of time into it, and I think we can definitely get some solutions. And I appreciate it. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Asante Sana, Ambassador. You're free to leave. And we'll be sharing with you a composite of the notes that can help with sort of the bond you talk about. The technology is there, and Deidre is an expert. She'll be speaking about how we could go ahead and do that.
I can also say, all this planning for the projects I laid out, the Afro Champions are the driving force. Like I said, they're holding series of events. The AfroLink is going to be launched in October in Kigali. The deadline is passed, but I have told them that if there are any diaspora that want to come, they have to let them in. So if there are any of you who would like to be invited to Kigali, I definitely would want to see you on the table, because we are looking for brains like you to be able to be part of the strategic planning. And you are quite right. We can raise ridiculous amounts of money as diaspora together. And I think with us having a bank that's willing, an African bank that's willing to guarantee the bonds, it doesn't get any better than that. A bank that you don't have to worry about your investments. Besides, everything is going to be run and controlled by the diaspora. The diaspora will decide what to invest in, what not to invest in. So I'm inviting all of you that are interested. San, we can come through you. Those of you who are interested in going to Kigali, it's October 9 and 10. We would love to have you. You need to be on the table to decide what direction you want your Africa to go. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ambassador. All right. So picking up from the discussion and the presentation that we've just had, Deidre, could you stitch it all together? You're well-versed in the startup space. You are running a virtual accelerator, I believe. You've put together a list of all the black entrepreneurs around the world comprehensively. What are your thoughts on what Jacob and Mr. Temple have been talking about?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we need to be concerned about, well, first let me give my background. I'm not an attorney. I am not an accredited investor. But I do know we're dealing with a double-edged sword. So in one instance, you have our government that is trying to protect its cheese, so to speak. It is using as an argument, which is a valid argument, that there are many scams out there. So to protect you, you must be harshly regulated. And by that harsh regulation, that means that the only people who can invest in ICOs or other types of STOs or SEOs, and it doesn't really matter that you don't know what the letters are, it just means that as an individual, you cannot no longer put $5 and get 500 of some unknown coin, because you might lose that $5 and you're going to be very upset, and then you're going to go to our government and say, hey, that was a scam, I lost $5. You're now, so our government is saying, well, we have an elite group of professionals. Now, how many black accredited investors do you know? So we've already diminished the pool to be a segregated, approved group who can invest in, let's say you have a blockchain company that is fundraising for a film, or fundraising for a musical artist. We're highly into the creative, the sports stuff, in terms of the United States of America at least. But if you're saying that such and such celebrity has this type of thing, but the accredited investors are only one to investigate, most of his investors are going to be white, even if that's a black driven company. So we have to recognize the double-edged sword, also that regulations currently, even before blockchain, are used to weaponize as a form of colonialization, of which Her Excellency just expressed in her keynote address. If you are an African American and all your family members have been African American, you may not be aware that in addition to African nations being unable to trade with one another unless they go through Europe, the same is true of the West Indies and the Caribbean at large. So Jamaica cannot have a hemp agreement with Trinidad without there being a Canadian and United States because of regulations. And if you do that, your accounts, it's not even going through a judicial system. The central banking systems are deciding you're guilty. We're freezing your account. And you could be like, well, I'm just working on some shipbuilding. No, anti-money laundering, there is no jurisprudence, zero. It is a form of colonialization. So we have to be aware that if we take risk and say, well, I'm going to, do what I think is right for my family and my people, that we can serve federal time. We can, in fact, we're going to have Lynn Albright speak later about the free, you see these yellow slips, pick them up off the floor, but she's going to explain if they're putting, white, young, college-educated men, double life sentence, plus 40 years, no chance of parole, you're getting a death sentence. There's no way around it. So we need to educate our attorneys, our accountants. They cannot stay in the dark and say this is some geeky nerd thing. They're going to have to fight like hell, because we have to open up the investment opportunities for our people because we're segregated out of it. And then we have to have the opportunities that we have, some safeguards in place that we're not being taken care of. But we can't build our businesses. We build our businesses. Tavonia's back there, and she's building, Guap Point or whatever. Most of her people, it's going to be white people. How does that serve? And once you have a disproportionate number, and I've seen it of the early black-led startups, the ones that are actually, if they're getting funding, they're getting funding from European pitch deck competitions, Asian pitch deck competitions. Sometimes even Santiago, Chile, there was the Bahamian Matthew Arnett who won top honors out of 250 companies. But the more investments we get from outside of our communities, because we are not approved to invest, the whiter their companies become. Because with the money comes, hey, this is going to be your new attorney. I just gave this much. This is going to be, and then you get the squeeze play. Now you're no longer running your company. So we need, and my focus is really on the education of the people who think this is some nerdy, geek, tech thing. It doesn't affect me. They need to understand that we're fighting not only to have access to build business on blockchain and cryptocurrency, but to stop the predatory regulations that keep us colonial. It keeps the Caribbean colonial, it keeps African colonial, and it's going to stop us from investing in those bonds she keeps talking about. So whether she has the digital bonds or not based on cryptocurrency, or we use the bank, our own government is going to say, you can't invest in that scam, but John Smith or so-and-so is an accredited venture. He can't. So the same thing that she's concerned about of the diaspora not investing back into Africa is going to happen because our government has put the laws and regulations in place to protect us.
All right. So unfortunately, we have to cut it off there and head into lunch. We are slightly behind schedule. So lunch will be for half an hour, and see you guys back. Happy lunch. Thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.